So I'm just going to talk about, I don't know, I'm currently drinking a seltzer and it's delicious. That's a lie. It doesn't taste like much of anything. It tastes like bubbly water.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 49, Tinahacks. Here she is. Tina, how you doing? Hello.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Well, this is a good nice way to start. Evan Grill, listening to my work, but I can't chat. Okay, well, hello, Evan. Thank you for being here at your work. Perfect timing to start off a podcast. This is so exciting. Okay, so for those that aren't familiar with Tina, she is a streamer. She hosts a GDQ hotfix show, which has the best name ever. She's a speedrunner. Tina, what's the name of your GDQ hotfix show?
Oh, it's Tina's RPG show, comma, I guess, Interrobang.
Who came up with that name for the show? That's awesome.
So it's something that actually just kind of came into existence. I do a lot of RPG speedruns. I spent, close to a year grinding for the world record in Final Fantasy VI. And there was a long-running joke about you should just do an RPG show, because GDQ has this like sort of stigma where everybody thinks, oh, GDQ doesn't put RPGs on. That's you go to RPG Limit Break for that. Right. So on the upcoming ideas spreadsheet that we had, there was, and I quote, Tina's RPG show, I guess. And then when we finally said, you know what, let's actually do this, that would be a lot of fun. We tried to think of a name that had like a better hook than Tina's RPG show, I guess. And we modified it by adding a question mark and an exclamation point, and then we called it good.
Okay, that's you're not going to top that, in my opinion. When you see that, it's one of my favorite names of any of the shows. So, thanks so much.
Good. It's really good. I'm not responsible for it. I'd love to take credit, but it was very much a team effort. I don't know who originally wrote I guess next to Tina's RPG show, but it was so long running that it was like it turned into an I guess. Yeah.
Well, it couldn't have been more perfect. Thank you so much for being here. And we have quite a bit to get to, so we're going to jump in. Let's first take it back a little bit. Let's kind of start off with almost every podcast like this. When did you start getting into games and gaming and playing games as a kid? Like, what were some of your early games that you played?
Sure. My family had a Commodore 64. I was an Air Force kid, so moved around. So the family had a computer in lieu of having the same friends year to year. So I had a C64. The first game that I remember playing on it that wasn't an edutainment game was Lode Runner. So Lode Runner, C64, tons of fun. We would eventually we would get an NES and then a Super Nintendo and a Genesis after that. But yeah, so when I started playing games, it would have been when we lived in Japan. I must have been 4 years old, something like that.
I always think back to my memories as being the Nintendo early on, but we actually did have a VIC-20, which is similar to the Commodore 64. And it's one of, I think it was, from what I understand now, it was kind of like an affordable game machine or affordable computer, if you will, stripped down. Were you working in the BASIC at all? Did you try out any of, any text adventure games or any of that kind of stuff that was available on the Commodore at the time?
I would eventually. Okay. Not at the very beginning. I would... Pretty early on, after we left Japan, we moved to California. I lived next door to a programmer, which is what got me started programming. At that time, I would have eventually started looking into like text adventures and things along those lines as good types of experiences that I could use to start fueling learning how to program. But for the first couple years, Lode Runner, a couple of other platformers, Gianna Sisters we had. And there was a Sesame Street edutainment game that I played a lot. And it was the only game that we had that I had to change discs in, which is what, like everything else, you put a disc in, it works. That seemed perfectly natural. But once I had to change a disc, something clicked for me. And that's what made me realize, like, a person did that. A person had to make that work. And I want to learn how to program because of that.
Are there any, so if you don't mind me asking then, when did your first experience perhaps with a PC or a Mac or something a little bit more traditional, what we might think of as like a home computer, or when did that come about?
Would have been 90, 92, 93, somewhere in there. I would have been 7 or 8.
Okay. So I think my guess is, so first of all, you and I are similar in age, and I always, it's tough to kind of distinguish between what I was using at school and at home, because both of them were these Apple IIe's with green screens, and at the time that was what we, it was Oregon Trail or, some other games that we might've had on there.
Right.
And but you're right. When you first, I hadn't put that together, but when swapping out a disc, that's one of those things where you realize that somebody had to have created this. Somebody had to have done something like this. And to have that realization as a kid, that's pretty amazing, actually. The fact that kind of put you on your path. Do you remember maybe your first time dabbling or considering trying some things out on your own in the computer, where there might have been your own creativity?
Gosh, honestly, most of what I did early on was largely just stealing ideas from things like what was it called? Adventure, but there's a more common name. I think it's Crystal Caves.
Okay.
But one of the text adventures, stealing ideas from that and just trying to make them work from first principles on my own.
Cool. And so, I mean, Jesus, so this is 90s. At some point, when do you discover speedrunning and gaming at a little bit more, I don't want to say dedicated level, I guess, so.
Well, like a more contemporary idea of speedrunning.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
We didn't have many games. So the proto speedrunning that my family did was my little brother and I, we would take turns playing games through one continue. So we got very good at making sure that we could beat the games that we had without ever game overing.
Yeah.
So we would play through, like one of the first NES games that we had was Wacky Races, which was just a delight. It was super fun. And both my brother and I could go through the entire game, never game over. Eventually we would be, one life clearing it. And to maximize the time that we got to play, of course, we had to make sure that we weren't dying. So it would be back and forth a little bit less. And then moving forward into the future, I want to say it was shortly after I started university, I encountered, at the time, we wouldn't know it as a task. It was largely presented, at least to people who weren't Japanese, who didn't, have the context for the video, as just some ungodly, super talented Japanese player playing through Super Mario Brothers 3. And, it would eventually, have something of a commotion around it due to the fact that it was a task. And then I remember there being long form debates over whether or not that's cheating or whether or not that's like just a separate type of art. But that was what got the idea of speedrunning in a sense of beyond, just being good enough at the game to beat it pretty quick and not game over. But now, there's this idea that, well, you're also doing it kind of fast, because it was a short video. It was like 12 minutes, if I recall.
That's correct, and it was because they were using the warp whistles. So I shouldn't say the I guess we'd call it a tasser, because they were using tools to create the run. So
absolutely.
I want to touch on something just real quick, because this has come up a couple of times before, where you remember this, but games were basically the same price they were in the 90s as they are now. They were $50, $60. It's very expensive. That's a lot of money to buy a new game. So many of us didn't have too many games in the house. And Frezzy Man was talking about this quite often, where he only had 4 games, and maybe he'd trade with somebody or rent. Renting here in the States was a big deal. The games you have to find a new way to replay them. And that comes up time and time again for people who speedrun nowadays, that getting through, you want to play the game. You love the game. You want to keep playing. This is what you have in front of you.
Yeah, it's fun. It's engaging.
Yeah. So I find that really interesting, that's kind of a common theme that's happening between speedrunners as well. And then to your point, finding that the Super Mario Brothers 3 task seems to come up so often. I think especially with people around our age, because it's like, it's one of those first times you saw, oh my God, I love this. Super Mario Brothers 3 is one of my favorite games.
It's a pivotal moment, right?
Right. Exactly. It really feels that way. Like that's a moment in the speedrunning lore and history to where we're at today.
Yeah, for sure. So
that's interesting. So when, if you don't mind me asking that one, so you went to university, great. Did you pick up a speed run like more traditionally at some point, where you tried one yourself, like more of what we have, the more modern definition of speed running, you know, where we just we play through a game as fast as we could?
It would be a long time. It took me a long time to start doing that. I would watch on Justin TV and then eventually Twitch, of course, people doing speed runs. But after the 64 came out, my family didn't get a 64, but by that time I was focusing pretty hard on just programming. And the gaming that I did was a board game called Go. So pretty much any game playing that I did was just over a board. And it wouldn't be for over a decade, well over a decade, until I really picked up video gaming as a hobby again. It wouldn't be until I was well into my professional life.
I have never played.
So, I'm sorry?
No. I was just gonna say I wanted to touch on that just a second, because I haven't played Go myself, but I know it's strategic and it's competitive, and so it's interesting that some of those routes. Because I mean, I'm surprised. Maybe I haven't asked it very often, but I'm curious if more speedrunners actually play Go, or games like, you know, chess and things like that are, you know, have this strategy to them where you have to use your brain. You have to use some thought to get through it. And I'm wondering, do you find Go at the time when you were playing it competitive, or was it more of the strategic? Like, what was it of Go that interested you?
That's a very broad question. I played tournaments, so yes, nice. I was in the competitive aspect of it. There's a certain amount of beauty in a game that you can play for your entire life and never be done learning. And that really hooked me. It still has me hooked. I still play Go fairly frequently. Oh, nice.
That's really cool. It's one of those games I really need to look into, because I enjoy chess, even though I'm really bad at it. But I enjoy games like what you're saying.
I'm also very, very bad at chess.
but to your point, it uses parts of your brain that I don't normally get to explore. And so to actually just to tune everything out and actually concentrate on a strategy, I think it's one of the things I love about speedrunning, that for, you know, I don't stream very long, but for the couple hours I'm trying to speedrun a game, I try to, you know, focus myself, and I struggle with, you know, as a creative, I'm always trying to do 10 different things at once. So it's, you know, it's nice to have that that thing, you know.
Yeah, it lets you zone in, which is it's quite nice.
So you mentioned you went to university. Did you were you a computer scientist, or if you don't, you know, what's some of the background there as you led into
I'm a comp sci major dropout.
Hey, there you go. Perfect. So after going through that journey, is that something where you consider do you feel like you got the majority of your experience then being self-taught, or were there things you did take from the time that you spent at university?
In my case, because I ended up dropping out pretty early on, I would say, yeah, I'm fairly self-taught. I've had the good fortune of ending up in the right place to be around people smarter than me basically throughout my life. So when somebody says self-taught, usually what that means is I was near people who were smarter than me, who had the patience to help me to grow. So I deserve none of the credit. And I want to make that clear. I was lucky, and I had people with a lot of patience.
I think that is such an important aspect, though, to doing anything well. And this has been one of my mantras too, is that if I'm learning to do something for my career, or whether it's speedrunning, or whether it's anything, surrounding yourself with people who do it better than you, there is no better way to push yourself than to be around that. And it's the idea that, oh man, I want to achieve, and you know, but that is such a valuable skill that not everyone always realizes. And if there's one, even it works great for speedrunning too, as apparently it worked for you in programming. But speedrunning the same thing, right?
You're going to potentially notice a theme, and I'm going to keep on going back to playing Go. Yeah. As something that has prepared me for this aspect as well. When you're playing Go, there's a million people who are better than you, and they are able to just wipe the floor with you at a moment's notice. And that type of reality, no matter how hard you're working, no matter how good you've become, it prepares you to be humble and to recognize that you have things to learn and that you have things to learn from other people. And it helps that to become not frustrating.
I love this common theme. Now I'm actually more intrigued about the game. I really need to give this a try because that sounds absolutely fascinating. And it's I don't want to say a calming, but a humbling experience among other things to play Go. What a game! I really got to. This sounds amazing.
It's a ton of fun. Its simplicity is part of what makes it. It's funny. It's almost painful because you can play to the best of your abilities and still be completely trounced. And that's another thing. Like, that is experience that I lean on all the time in speedrunning, in anything. Knowing that I can give something my all and still be at a point where I have things where I needed to learn this before I could succeed.
That's such an important attribute of if you're going to grind any world record in any game, that's such an important attribute to achieve at that level, because for sure. you're going against failure over 90% of the time. So it's that's such an important attribute. Before we get into some of the games you've speedrun, I'd love to. So when you pursued then a career in programming and coding, is there an industry sector or a thing you decided that your career took you that place, or have you gone into? Because I know we'll get into some of the things you've done for the speedrunning community, the gaming community, but I was curious if there's, if your career path took you someplace.
So it's largely been InfoSec focused. I have, for the most part, bounced between doing red teaming, so penetration testing, hacking into other systems. I bounced between that and then doing a more traditional engineering role, so building software. And it's been good to use my experience in each of those kind of focuses to advance my knowledge in the other side.
When I asked you to join the podcast, I had just finished a research project that I've been doing. So I'm in grad school, and we had to do, almost every grad program has some sort of research project associated with. And I've been doing all these interviews for Sequence Break, and there kept being this connection between speedrunning and computer scientists or coders or people who have gone into that field. And so I started doing some analysis, and one of the things the professor recommended was to start looking at common phrases or ideas that, have come up during all your interviews. And one of them that keeps happening is this idea of process. There's a couple things that have shown up. One is process and problem solving. And I'm curious if there are things that you have found in your career that you've also that can appeal, or I'm sorry, that can also be applied to speedrunning as far as like problem solving is going, like a process to solve a problem or to figure something out. Any notice of that? So the first game that I ever speedran, with a timer and, doing it as what we would consider contemporary speedrunning, was a game where the entire reason that I created a Twitch account was so that I could reverse engineer its PRNG on stream because it seemed like it would be fun. It seemed like it would be interesting. Of course.
So I think that it's fair to say that I have applied some of the skills that I've picked up professionally to speedrunning. Whenever I'm doing glitch hunting, whenever I'm trying to figure out new strats that are going to lean on common programming mistakes or not necessarily mistakes, but especially with older games, just the sorts of shortcuts that had to be taken for the to be able to make the game performant and play well. So yeah, in terms of glitch hunting, that definitely has been one place where I've leaned on my professional experience. Other than that, just being able to, when I really don't understand something, being able to rip it open and start reversing it has been pretty helpful.
It's a challenging, it's something where I hear this talk about reverse engineering, or just thinking of something perhaps not backwards, but breaking it down into maybe some of the more simplest chunks and simplest forms. And I struggle with that personally. But as a speedrunner, like it can really open up a game that, if you're wanting to find, like you're mentioning, glitches, clips, things like this,
sure,
ways that the game wasn't intended to be run originally. But knowing how some of this stuff was created, and nowadays, especially for 8 and 16-bit games, we have so many tools where we can, really break it down and look into how the thing runs and works. So it's kind of a fun approach, I would say, an interesting approach to say the least.
Yeah.
The other thing that came up was interesting was the idea of just being curious. Like it wasn't specifically said, but time and time again, just wanting to know how a game works or wanting to know why the game is doing this. And you kind of already mentioned it a little bit as you're doing it.
Yeah, I guess so. I've known enough people who are happy not to know the in-depth details that I would say that it's not, a requirement.
Sure.
But it definitely helps me. That sort of curiosity angle is something that keeps me interested and keeps me coming back, for sure.
Did you ever, just for fun or perhaps professionally pursue like creating a game from scratch or creating your, your own? I mean, I know it sounds like a big question, but have you ever tried coding your own games? And we'll get into some of the things you've worked on, but like your own original game or anything like that?
I haven't. Game programming is one of those areas where I am so in the dark in terms of what is considered modern practice, in terms of what is the standard approach that, I've never even started looking into it.
I've recently been watching, I think it must have been a month or so ago, but you were creating, I believe it was an emulator, if I'm correct. Have you been working on an emulator recently? Can you tell me a little bit about some
I've been building a 6502 emulator. More to the point, somebody had asked what it would look like to build a generalized emulator. And I decided, because every so often I'll do a tech stream instead of a gaming stream. So I decided, let's build out a DSL, a domain-specific language for describing emulators. So we did that. We built a toy architecture that I just kind of made up off the spot that would have been one of the worst CPUs that anybody had ever used. But we got far enough into it to prove that it worked. And then I said, all right, well, that's all fine and good, but let's do something real now. So I grabbed the 6502 spec, and we spent a few streams just going through and building a 6502 emulator. So now the next thing that I'll do is probably learning how the FPU works on the NES so that we can, or not FPU. The NES does not have an FPU. That would be really nice, actually. That would prevent a lot of the glitches that exist in those games. The PPU, the picture processing unit.
Interesting. And
so it'll probably turn into an NES at some point. Yeah.
Well, that's cool, though. But you're creating, if I'm understanding this correctly, then, though, you're creating, I don't want to say a platform, but you're creating something that you could build off of, and it can go in multiple directions. It's not something that just exists in a vacuum, is what I guess I'm understanding correctly. Okay.
Right. It's generalized enough that you can use it to describe a Super Nintendo. You could use it to describe, name an architecture, and you could use it to describe that.
TurboGrafx 16.
Absolutely a TurboGrafx 16.
So that's really fascinating. And although I don't understand a lot, and I try to, I really enjoy the coding streams. What are some of the other things that you've worked on as far as like community projects like that? Because I found that it was really cool seeing like the chat participate and you having a conversation about what you were doing as it was happening.
Yeah. So other stuff that I've worked on is that it's not a graveyard because none of the projects are dead, but it's all half finished.
Typical.
I'm working on a timer because streaming under Linux, LiveSplit is a great piece of software, which is crashy in the best cases when you're running it under Wine, which is what you need to do to run LiveSplit. So I'm working on a timer. It is good enough for me to use it and nowhere near good enough for me to release it. I have a overlay and large scale backend system so that my overlay can tie into chat, can watch for... It was originally started because Streamlabs at the time didn't support Extra Life as a donation source.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I was taking donations specifically through Extra Life for children's hospitals. So my only option was to build my own. So I did. That one is technically open source and like already available. It's not finished. It's in a real sorry state of affairs, but it limps along well enough to run streams off of. which is the most dangerous place for a piece of software to be, where it works well enough that I can kind of limp along with it. That's something that I should know better than to get a piece of software towards.
Well, no big deal. Live setting, a bunch of people using it at the same time. No issues. Is there anything else, or is that that's
There's other projects that are kind of on the horizon, but nothing that I've been showing off on stream.
You mentioned it, and I think this is something that I've heard. It's interesting that it's come up in my stream, and I mentioned this because there are a fair amount of people who develop and code and program in my stream, and I think on Twitch actually, it just seems to be one of those common things that people who enjoy this are out there in the Twitchverse, and that is. Sure. You stream on Linux. You stream on Linux. You do your speedruns on Linux. You stream, and has that been something that you've always done? And if so, what pushed you in that direction to actually do? Because it sounds like a unique thing, to say the least, compared to streaming on Windows.
It is my first Windows computer. Personally, I didn't have until Windows 10. And you hear that, and most people will think, okay, so you used Macs all your life, and the programmer that I lived next to, when we finally got an Intel machine, was really, really into this funky system called the Berkeley Standard Distribution of Unix. So my first Intel machine ran BSD. And then I would eventually move from FreeBSD, which I used for a long time, to having a Linux workstation and an OpenBSD machine as well for development. And that's how I've been basically since my first Linux machine was in 2001. And Linux as a primary workstation happened in around 2010. Before that, it was FreeBSD as my primary workstation. And just having Linux and OpenBSD as also machines that I have available to me.
What are some of let's do an advantage, disadvantage? Because I know there's obviously some challenges running Linux, but I also noticed that I was working on a project with Duango last at Summer Games Done Quick 2019, and he was able to problem solve in a way that I hadn't seen before, where he went to the command line and we were having a compiling issue of some sort. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was able to, do some command line inputs that solved a problem that I would have done it a completely different way, obviously on Windows. So I'm curious what some of the advantages and disadvantages are of streaming on Linux.
So for streaming specifically, familiarity. I know my system backwards and forwards. That helps a lot. I have the ability with KVM to run VMs, and I think that through the Oracle virtual machine, VMware. No, not VMware. What is it? Oracle?
Isn't it VMware? No, am I doing it wrong?
No. VMware is a company.
Oh.
What is their virtualization platform? VirtualBox.
VirtualBox. Okay, there you go.
So I think that VirtualBox under Windows can do raw hardware pass-through now, is where I was getting at, because that's a platform that you don't have to pay for. VMware definitely can, and it's also not free. So I think that Windows users do have stuff like that available to them now. But for a long time, I've been able to pass raw hardware through to VMs, which is quite useful.
It's very cool.
So I have a secondary graphics card now that I use. I actually don't run my games through Wine. I run them through just a Windows VM with just a raw graphics card pass through to it and a raw SSD pass through to it. So it looks, for all intents and purposes, like it's just a regular computer.
That's interesting. So I assume then you're streaming on the same PC that you're gaming on, but because of the way you're able to use the hardware with the lanes and everything, that's fast. So you're not losing any performance, it sounds like, by having direct access like that.
I haven't done the benches myself, but most benchmarks suggest that you're losing about 1 to 1.5% of your total performance.
Yeah, that's minuscule compared to what you would normally get on a drop off in a typical. I know. Anytime I throw up a PC game, all of a sudden fans start whirling up and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
So fascinating. Okay, so that's really interesting. And then have you run into times where there are things that you have struggled with or can't do because you're on a Linux machine?
Anything where I have to run something through Wine. I mentioned LiveSplit is one issue. The one other advantage I should mention, though, is that I have an audio routing subsystem called Jack,
Okay.
which audio in Windows is hard. Doing work with GDQ, doing work with the RPG Valkyries, doing work with Dwango, I've had to help people get their audio set up for marathon streaming. And, oh boy, audio on Windows is really hard. My my audio routing is admittedly not simple, but it works really well. And it allows me to do a lot of it allows me to do a lot of work, a lot of intricate routing of audio through whatever applications I need to, having multiple virtual audio devices, which is a thing that Windows for some reason does not support. I could go on rants about audio under Windows specifically.
It's so true. And it's one of those things where I think it's becoming thankfully it's becoming more commonplace how important audio is to streaming, to any sort of content production at all. But it's one of those things as humans that we can forgive a fair amount of video issues, video not being up to, not being in HD quality, 1080p, whatever.
Sure.
But we struggle with things that we can't hear. It's really one of those things, if you have that sense, that ability.
You notice pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. So the fact that it is that I have only begun to go down the rabbit hole of audio on Windows, and I completely agree with you. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense to me. Some of the where Windows is just we had an audio issue starting the stream just on Discord that there was a discrepancy between what my desktop audio was and what was going through Discord and all those things. So it's definitely a challenge. The fact that you have something that works on Linux, that honestly that appeals to me. I've considered trying just Linux for streaming for that reason, because of some of the access you have to audio streamlining, to say the least.
It's nice. Of course, again, anything where wine is involved, there's plenty of tools available to Windows streamers that don't have counterparts on Linux yet. So it's not 100% better. There's a downside. And of course, there is familiarity.
Right.
For me, streaming on Linux is the obvious choice because I'm familiar with it. For somebody who's been using Windows for the last 10, 20 years, streaming on Linux is going to be a lot more daunting. It's something that is not plug and play.
What distro are you using? I'm curious.
I use Arch.
Okay, great. So it's out there, widely available. It's easy to.
Yeah.
That's there's some. I know there's communities around Arch, so that's helpful. Also helpful.
There's a big community around Arch for sure.
Interesting, fascinating. Okay, well, thanks for sharing some of that, because I think that's it's interesting how often that comes up, and for people who, yes, you can stream, you can speedrun, all those things are possible. I assume, what kind of a capture card are you using, if you don't mind me asking, in your Linux setup?
So have you interviewed Dwango yet?
Yes, he was way early on.
The exact same card. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I also use a Magewell, the Magewell HDMI USB 3 capture card, which is just, it's brilliant. It has run rock solid for years and years.
The one caveat I would put to that is that if you're just getting started, you don't have to go that much power right away.
Absolutely not. Yeah,
it's an investment.
It's not a cheap card. Yeah, it's not a cheap card. It is a great card for somebody who is already, intending to do streaming, is already going to for sure have a use for like one of the better HDMI capture cards on the market.
I will do a quick pitch, and if you haven't seen it already, in fact, I think it's in this feed, in the podcast feed. Tina, myself, Dwango, and Evan did a panel at GDQ where we talk a lot about the hardware stuff, because it's a rabbit hole. You could just we didn't even, I feel like we just touched the surface too. We didn't even really, but
we kept it really high level
exactly.
for that panel.
But I think that it's awesome that there are options out there. If you want to speedrun, if you want to capture your speedruns, if you want to stream, there are options there on the Linux side of things that are supported. That you can find, like Magewell, they're still producing cards. They're still a company. They're out there, and you can have support with your hardware. So do they natively support Linux, or is that something where the community has had?
They do.
Okay, cool, very cool. That's great.
Okay. I'll go even a step further from what you just said. I have gotten cell phone videos pointed at TVs, because I mod a bunch of games on speedrun.com. I've gotten cell phone videos pointed at TVs for me to verify the run. You should have fun with your video games. And if that means you're speedrunning, even though you don't have a computer that's set up to do it, and you need to point a cell phone, camera at your TV and record your run that way, like, do it. What kind of jerk would say, no, you must be this tall to ride?
I'll take it even a step further than that, Tina. There's screen capturing now on Android that's native to the platform. If you're on one of the newer, versions of the operating system, you can record your speed run on your phone if you want, if that's what you have access to. Like, you and I are both big advocates of this, but I always say use what you have, and it's you can just you don't need to buy all this extra stuff until you're comfortable and ready to do so, or you're able to do so. If you want a speed run, just do it. There's really, just get in there, and there's so many ways to do it nowadays. Okay, cool. So let's actually get into the speedrunning part of this. What was absolutely the first game that you decided to record and time and consider a speedrun? It
was Undertale. Right after I finished reverse engineering its PRNG and figuring out how it worked, I noticed in my casual playthrough, I noticed some biases, or what I thought were some biases, in the way that it would generate random encounters. And that made me want to reverse engineer it, and then once I understood how the RNG worked, I thought, well, it would be a shame if I didn't now use this knowledge somehow, right?
Absolutely. Oh man. Okay. Undertale is one of those games I haven't played yet, but that we're going to do on stream. I don't play all games on stream, but that's one of those ones where I've heard it's a really fun stream game. And how long did you stay grinding it for?
How long did it take? It was only a few months, I feel. 3-4 months. And then I burned out on it pretty quick because I was doing primarily the genocide route. This was before a lot of the glitches with it were known.
Got it. Okay.
But I managed to bounce back and forth with the other top runners by the end of that, and then I ended up moving off of that onto the original Kaizo Super Mario World. Because
that's kind of a leap.
it was a change of pace, and I needed a change of pace.
Had you played any hacks or anything like that before?
No, that was my first.
Oh my gosh, that's the one you jump into. Jeez.
Yep.
What'd you think? Once you get the speedrun, looks fun. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I've never approached the speedrun itself. This was just for a casual playthrough, and it took me several streams to complete the game. I'm sure it's surprising to hear. It was a ton of fun.
I got to tell you, when I was looking up your profile, there were a few surprises. I noticed that you maybe speed ran a little bit of Super Mario Brothers, the original, for a little bit.
I played around with it. The time that I have for any percent is abysmal. It's an embarrassing 6 minutes and something, if I recall.
Not quite the sub 5, but just
not quite there. No.
But it was obviously you enjoyed the one thing I became abundantly clear. You enjoyed dabbling in different games, and Absolutely. It's obviously you like the variety and things like that because of all these different games I saw. It's pretty cool. You even did the original Super Mario World for a little bit. It looks like.
Oh yeah, that one I got pretty almost okay at.
Did you ever play any of the randomizers or anything like that? Did you ever go down enjoy?
I played it. I played the Author Blues randomizer a couple of times.
It's pretty fun. It's fun to watch. I haven't tried it myself actually, but
it was really fun to race. So we would do usually just no Star World races.
Okay, so I understand the timeline a little. When did Final Fantasy VI become a speedrun for you that you wanted to pursue?
When did I become a partner? Because it started about a year before I became a partner.
Okay.
So I think it would have been 2007. That sounds right.
17?
Gonna make me go. Did I say 17? Yeah, 17. Yeah. 2017.
Cool.
Yeah.
What was it? I mean, first of all, it's a wonderful game. Obviously, we can get the fact that it's just an awesome game out of the way. What about the speed run was something that kind of captivated you?
So RPG speedruns are something that I've enjoyed very much watching. I always found them because I've been watching GDQs since CGDQ. And I always enjoyed just kind of chilling out and watching somebody do, something so demanding and so intricate for, 3, 4, 6 more hours. It's a ton of fun, and it's really impressive to me. at the same time, Final Fantasy VI is the last video game that I beat before I quit playing video games. So I wanted to go back to it at some point. So when I heard that there was a tournament for just the first kind of act of Final Fantasy VI, it was a Kefka at Narsh tournament where you just speedrun up to that point where you defeat Kefka at the battle at Narsh, and then, that's your time. I thought, well, this is as good an excuse as any to get started with that. And then I kept on playing it, and I kept on playing it, and then I decided, well, it would be a shame if I stopped. So I didn't.
It's first of all, the game continues to be evolved upon by the community.
Yes.
The randomizers, the free enterprise, everything that goes, that it just, I feel like I don't even understand half of the things that are happening within the community, that how much support, how much love this game gets, and how much it's been adopted. Have you tried any of the free enterprise, the random, any of that type of stuff as around the game?
No, there's a couple of good ones for Final Fantasy VI that I haven't played. There's Beyond Chaos, and I forget the other really popular hack for 6.
Yeah, it's escaping me.
Yeah. But there's huge communities around all of the hacks for 6. But for me, because I was interested specifically in speedrunning it, I focused on just the vanilla. I bought a Final Fantasy VI cart and, just kept on using that.
You mentioned something here that I do want to touch upon for just a moment, and that's that you mentioned when you quit gaming. And so was it like a cold turkey thing where you weren't gaming at all when you decided to do the coding and the programming thing?
Not really, because I was already programming before that. I was already kind of playing Go before that. It had gotten to a point where, because, we didn't get a Nintendo 64 or anything, and I was, focusing on just other stuff at the time. I didn't have a huge drive to, beg my parents for a new console.
Yes.
So it sort of just happened. So I can look back now and I can say, yeah, I quit playing video games at that point. It was never an intentional thing. It was never something where I went like, I quit. I'm done playing video games forever. Board gaming for me, please. That's it.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it was all okay. That makes a little bit more sense. It's rare that I would hear somebody say, not to say that it's bad or anything. I do understand people definitely take breaks from certain games, certain types of games, and things like that. Like when the Beast was on, he was talking about taking a break from League of Legends. Just there was the competitive aspect, the community, that type of thing wasn't necessarily for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Found Mario make all those kind of things. So I think this is I've probably watched more Shantae and Wonder Boy games on your stream than any others. So
Those were a ton of fun.
Which came first? Was it did you first started playing Shantae or Wonder Boy? I know there's many games. Which series did you tackle first, or were they maybe around the same time?
So Shantae came first.
Okay.
I was taking a trip overseas. I needed a game at the time that because I didn't really do any computer games at that point when I was taking a trip to Finland, and I was going to be a couple months in Finland, and I wasn't taking my SNES with me. I wasn't taking any of my retro gear with me to stream. So I needed to find a new game. And at that time, there was a sale on for Shantae. I had watched The Sound Defense play Shantae and the Pirate's Curse at GDQ, and it was a ton of fun. So I decided, let's pick up Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. And then I also was, at that time, it was right after a GDQ, so I was looking for a 12-hour challenge game. Shantae was kind of long for a 12-hour challenge game, so I looked through the other Shantae titles. And the any percent for Risky's Revenge was, south of 20 minutes. I thought, perfect. That'll be a very easy game to tackle for my 12-hour challenge. I'll just pick up both Shantae games at the time. I think they were probably also on sale or something, so it's great. And I like to play with a controller. Keyboard games don't really do it for me, so they were both controller games, which is great. And maybe that was an inappropriate choice for a 12-hour challenge game.
It's a little bit longer.
Risky's Revenge has a ton of frame perfect tricks, so yes, you can make it. You can absolutely make it a sub 20 game, but it won't be at first. That's for sure. Turns out frame perfect tricks are really hard to do.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, it's weird, right? But then, so I had a bunch of the Shantae community kind of just start showing up in my stream because I was doing Shantae games. And they mentioned, hey, there's a remake of the game that inspired Shantae coming out soon. You should check that out. I bet that you'll have fun with it. So I thought, well, yeah, that'll be fun. And then Author Blues and I both picked up Wonder Boy The Dragon's Trap, which is a remake of Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap for the Master System. When, like, day one when it came out. And we raced it blind. And it was a ton of fun. So that became my new main speed game at that point.
You see all these different categories and things you've submitted on for both the games, and it's I highly, if you haven't played them, either one of them, do yourself a favor and do it. I've played I picked up Shantae actually on the 3DS. It was the first time I had played it, and so just to throw it out, it's available on multiple platforms. It's, as your point, it's a great if you're going on a trip, although I don't know, and nobody's going on a trip right now, but I mean, when we get back into some of those things where you could, but it's also, to your point, it's just fun to play, and I've really enjoyed watching the speedrun of it and see what you all have done with the games. The Wonder Boy Monster Boy games also are another series of games that I've played. We have two, I can't remember how many games. There's one or two games of it on the TurboGrafx-16, so it's where I played it.
Yep.
And I don't, is it Monster Boy 3 or Wonder? I don't remember even what it's called at this point. But
so you have a different Wonder Boy 3 than the Master System has. The Wonder Boy 3 on the PC Engine is a side scroller.
Yes,
like
correct.
a side-scrolling shoot 'em up specifically.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's a good point. That's a great way to play it.
So it's a different Wonder Boy 3, which is just wild. Look into, if you're interested, the lineage of the Wonder Boy games, because it's wild.
I Wikipedia'd it.
There's so many weird licensing things going on with that series.
If you read the Wikipedia, it makes no sense. Like, you understand why this is that. I mean, it literally, it's tough to
makes
follow.
no sense at all.
So, nonetheless, they're still fun games to play. So,
they are. They're fantastic.
Got to enjoy the attorneys and everything who must have been involved in that IP issue. And then more recently, I've been watching you play. You've been running, I don't know if you still are, but you've been running Octopath Traveler. And it's a game that I just started playing. So are you still running it? Tell me a little bit about Octopath Traveler and why you pursued that game.
So Octopath, so I picked that up because I wanted another RPG to run. It has a ton of really short categories. I say really short, and in RPG terms, really short means south of an hour. So I've been pushing each of those categories south of an hour, and then eventually I'm going to do the full game run, which is substantially longer than that. It's about 4 hours long. But yeah, I'm still working on that one. It's a ton of fun. The battle system is really, really interesting. It's
super interesting.
It's unique compared to any of the other games that I've speedrun, which makes it really engaging.
I think it elevates. I mean, I love the music and the story and just the art style of it, but the battle system really elevates it to something that it feels like something you haven't played before. At least that's what I like. I haven't, to your point, I have not experienced the battle system as an RPG the way that Octopath operates. It's just so intricate.
My understanding is that if you've played the Bravely Second series of games, Bravely First, is that it? I haven't played them, as you can tell. But my understanding is that it takes a lot of cues from those games and it kind of refines them. So it might feel a little bit familiar to people who've played that series, but I haven't. So for me, it was totally fresh, and being totally fresh is a really great way to get me engaged with a game.
It's something that I have played Bravely Default, and so it's
That's
similar.
The one. Thank you.
Yeah, it's similar like that, but I found it took it to a whole new level. To be honest, it felt like the next logical step. So
sure.
Pretty cool. Man, I'm glad I love the way that they break down the categories too for Octopath. Like it makes sense to the game where you can. Is it by character or how the single story? There we go.
Yeah,
single
so it's
story.
Single story by the character that you start with, because you have to finish that character's storyline to trigger the end credits.
It's a cool way to do it, and I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's been fun to watch now that I've actually played through the game parts. I haven't got through all of it. I'm just literally touching the surface of the game, but it's nice it's fun to watch, to say the least. Okay, so you have made you've made some appearances at GDQ. You're obviously you're one of the hosts of one of the shows. What is it you enjoy about being associated with and having your own show and things like that on GDQ's channel?
Oh gosh, having my show on GDQ's channel means that I get to hunt out people who I can get exposure for. Like, I can hunt out people who are doing really cool stuff, running RPGs, which just in general tend to be often lower viewership. There are exceptions, but you look at, something like a Super Mario World speedrun versus like a Final Fantasy, especially non-Final Fantasy VI, non-Final Fantasy free enterprise. Find a Final Fantasy IV speedrun that's not free enterprise, and you'll often find, lower viewership. Getting people discovered is really exciting to me. Helping people to get their games discovered, helping people to show off why they love RPG speedrunning, why it's fun for them. Just helping people to find like the magic in RPG speedrunning it's just really great, because it's, for a ton of people, it's a new experience. And new experiences are one of the things that drives me.
I think that's a really good point. And it's been, I only discovered Limit Break actually in the last few years. I think like a lot of people, GDQ was the first thing I saw back in, 14 or 15, because it was the thing that everyone was watching at the time. And it's nice to see that there have been growth in the community of RPGs. Because to be honest with you, it's actually my favorite genre of games to play. As much as I love speedrunning, and I've never speedrun an RPG, I love getting sucked into a story and to 40 hours of gameplay.
There's something about a really immersive like world that you can get lost in.
Absolutely. And I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up, so I just recently found Secret of Mana. I'm finding Final Fantasy, like all these games I didn't play as a kid.
Gosh.
Chrono Trigger,
such a treat.
Chrono Trigger is life changing for me. I just played it maybe a year or two ago, and it's one of the best games I've ever played in my life. So it's like, but that's, I think that's great that there's this outlet, because GDQ has tried, a lot of times it's the overnight, RPG run, which are really fun if you're awake and you want to get into it. But we don't always get that during the, the prime time viewing hours, whatever, if you will. So the fact that something like this exists is really cool. What are some of your favorite runs you've seen so far on the show?
Gosh, that one's tough. You're asking me to pick favorites, and I feel like that's wrong.
No problem.
Instead of picking a favorite, the most surprising run that I've seen so far has been Final Fantasy XIV. It's an MMO. The idea of speedrunning in MMO was pretty alien to me before it was pitched. It was an idea that came in because Final Fantasy XIV at the time was having an anniversary. It's very clear that I don't play Final Fantasy XIV because I can't tell you which anniversary it was, but it was an anniversary. And before that, the exposure that I had to MMO speedrunning was like, grind a character to level 20 as fast as you can, which to my sensibilities doesn't sound engaging.
Right.
But this was speedrunning through specific story content. And while there was, dungeons and raiding, it wasn't about making it so that, you got a level 1 character to level 20, which for the people who do that is almost certainly super engaging and super interesting. But grinding through the storyline stuff was clearly both surprising to, a lot of people who joined in to watch. But it was fresh. It was something that a ton of people had not been exposed to. It's something that I hadn't been exposed to. It was a ton of fun getting to learn about just all of that aspect of, this entire other branch of the speedrunning community that I had no idea existed before that.
That's awesome to hear, because I still feel like I have those moments all the time where, of course you can speedrun this. Why not? Where people have taken, this is I think this is the wonderful thing about speedrunning. It can be applied to almost anything, whether it's a video game or not, by the way, too. But within the, speedrunning is such a niche to begin with, but then we have all these little niches within our niches, so I would have never even contemplated speedrunning an MMO, but it sounds like there's some really interesting and fascinating things that go along with that. So.
Yeah, and it turns out there's a reasonably sized community around it for people who want to get started, and it's a super cool concept.
my moment like that, and he's been on the podcast, but King Dime was talking about speedrunning StarCraft. And like, StarCraft, isn't that like, because it's such a competitive game out there, esports,
Yeah, that's what I think about with it. But yeah, there've been some StarCraft has been on GDQ. I think one of the Command and Conquers has been on GDQ. And they're really cool runs.
They're really cool runs, They're and just, you see everyone watching the keyboard with the hotkeys and everything. It's really wild to watch. So.
Yeah, it's mind blowing.
It's so cool, and I think it's one of the things I've been really enjoying about a lot of the GDQ hotfix shows. And if you're not aware of them, you're bound to see something you haven't seen before on them. And I think it feels like it's built into the DNA of what they're trying to do anyway. But if you're interested at all in something, hey, you know what? I didn't know this existed. The hotfix shows, specifically your show too, but all of them that you can get to have that experience while watching.
They're all great. There's tons and tons of people behind them working to make really cool, engaging content so that, the GDQ channel doesn't just, sit idle.
Exactly.
Than the 2 weeks out of the year that we have GDQ events.
What's coming up? What's next for you, Tino? You've been speedrunning now for a while. You mentioned you even watched the first GDQ. You seem to keep streaming. So
yeah, I mean, what's next for me? More of the same. I've been working on more tech content lately than previous. I want to make that kind of part of the mainstays of the channel.
Nice.
Not going to stop speedrunning. It's super fun. But yeah, more tech content because a lot of people are engaging with that, and it's the same crowd showing up, which means that there's an entire sort of I hate to say need that was unmet, but there's another way that I can enrich the lives of the people who are showing up anyway to watch me press buttons on a controller with a timer running.
So true. And isn't that the great thing about streaming is that it doesn't have to just be this one thing or that thing, you can share your passions, and obviously this is one of them. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, I do need to say I have enjoyed basically everything I've seen on your stream, and I appreciate the way you're able to describe and talk through some of these things, because sometimes my brain doesn't work the way that I can think through problems the way a programmer or coder was, and it's a helpful thought process, to say the least, to see you and the community work through problems while you're streaming some of the coding and programming. It's really interesting stuff.
It's really cool. Because the way that I'm going to work through a problem is going to be very different from even the way that the other people who are very talented at programming. It's going to be different from the way that a Dwango or an Author Blues, right, two people who are quite accomplished programmers in their own rights, would work through them. And all of those different perspectives put together makes for just a much wider perspective that gives us a lot of approaches towards any individual common goal.
Right, exactly. And to that point, anything? Are you going to continue to speedrun Octopath? Are there other games you want to return to, or just continue on fighting the next speed game?
Octopath is definitely still something that I want to do. I would like to move on to the full game category and start trying to push a time down there and get pretty competitive on that leaderboard. After that, it's tough to say what comes next, because it's always about what game is going to grab me at the time. Because if I'm having fun, other people are going to have fun. If I'm forcing myself to do something, nobody's going to be into that. Nobody's going to enjoy that.
It's so true. And it's one of those things that you got to... Speaking of Author Blues, the first thing I ever heard or saw that made sense to me was, I'm going to play what I want. Like, you gotta speed run what is appealing to you. It's such a true point. Well, thanks again so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it. If people want to find your stream, find your stuff, where can they find you on the internet?
Sure. So my stream is twitch.tv/tinahacks or tinahacks.tv, which will take you there. I tweet mostly tech-related shit posting on Twitter at
and it's great.
Call Me Weast, which I'm sure that you will edit and post to have the actual spelling of that.
It's spelled weird. I know that. There's an E to U in the wrong place.
Yeah. Whenever somebody encounters my surname, it's really fun for me to make them guess how to pronounce it before I'm willing to tell them. Having said it on this podcast is not going to help me with that.
No, for sure.
But it's a very fun game for me specifically and for nobody else.
Well, hey, at least somebody's getting some entertainment out of it, you know?
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, yes, and I highly recommend that. I do enjoy the things that you post on Twitter, and I've enjoyed all of your content, and I honestly can't thank you enough for doing this. What you do for the community, and also your own brand of content. I just really enjoy, and so thank you for taking the time and sharing some of your thoughts today.
I've really enjoyed the stuff that you've done. Like you're easily among my favorite channels on Twitch, so it's always good to get to hang out.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, leave a review. All those things go a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter @LatMackey, or you can also join the LatMackey Discord, where we have a sequence break channel. We talk about guests, we have questions. It's really interactive, really fun. Please feel free to stop on by. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.